Hello, dear Motorsport-Magazin friends and Formula One fans on this sprint Saturday here in Austin. Let's be honest, the sprint race wasn't really all that great, but we do have some exciting topics for you. Among other things, the tiresome topic of track limits, but today in a different version. It's not so much about a single lap, the sprint shootout. The white line was painted thicker in 3 places overnight, so it wasn't such a big problem anymore, but in the race there was a lot of discussion. Afterwards, there were still discussions with the stewards, with the drivers, who wanted to have scenes explained to them as to what exactly was okay and what wasn't. But the biggest topic of discussion was the fight between Oscar Piastri and George Russell. Russell overtook Piastri off the track, i.e., leaving the track and gaining a lasting advantage, received a 5-second penalty for doing so, and lost the position due to that. So actually everything was okay, yes or no? Not for many drivers, because you can assume that if you now know that there is a 5-second penalty, you might do it on purpose. Mercedes Motorsport boss Toto Wolff has admitted that they had calculated this in, that they thought they had more pace and could then extend their lead, but they hadn't. Toto Wolff took it on his own head, and that shows that it was calculated. Lando Norris, who was really clear in his media session, said, well, so what, you just calculate that in the future, that you can do that so that you can pass outside the track. It's definitely better to collect the 5 seconds than if you're stuck behind someone the whole time. After all, he himself was stuck behind Carlos Sainz for ages. Possibly he should have cashed in 5 seconds, passed him quicker, and then would have reeled in a better result in the end. The topic is not new, it has been discussed for years. In 2017, perhaps some of you can still remember, back then Nico Hülkenberg in the Renault, it was even about constructors' ranks. Force India raged afterwards. He deliberately drove through the chicane, gained a position, collected the 5 seconds. In the end, what better for him, especially on tracks where overtaking is really difficult, that is really an option. Here in Austin, overtaking is generally a bit easier, but it's still not quite as easy. And then you might really accept it on purpose, which would of course be fatal for Formula One, for racing, if you just say, well, I'll collect the penalty and that's it. That's not what the rule makers had in mind. Lando Norris is bothered by the whole thing. He says the penalties are far too lenient, but what is his solution? He says, well, you've just got to give the position back, but the problem is when that goes to the stewards, it takes a bit of time until they've established whether you've really gained an advantage illegally, and then giving the position back might not work sometimes. He says, well, it doesn't matter. You took the risk. You gained the advantage illegally. Then you have to live with the consequences and simply give the position back. His team principal Andrea Stella says, yes, you have to close this rule gap somehow, you have to do something, but it's a complex matter, more complex than it looks at first, so it's not quite as simple as Lando Norris imagines, because you can't really order a position swap. The race director, he can offer to do it to the teams or to the drivers. He can say, wait a minute, I don't think that was right, give the position back. But if the team doesn't do that, then it goes to the stewards, and the stewards can't order a position swap. They have to issue a penalty or not. So you probably have to change the rules in the long term if you want to close the gap or do the tracks differently. So I'm curious. I really hope that this won't be a big issue in the race. That would be very, very unfortunate. Especially here, there are actually sequences where you can drive quite well side by side, but then the track limits unfortunately play a very, very big role. So we are curious. I hope that goes well. And then we hope in the future that the rule gap is closed and that the tracks also become better. The sprint was not a great spectacle. Max Verstappen had previously taken pole in the shootout. The starting laps, yes, they were really exciting, so it was down to the wire. Max Verstappen defended really hard. Charles Leclerc was pushed to the outside, but it was still okay. Leclerc also said it was fine. Then it looked for a moment as if Lewis Hamilton might be able to do something, but then Verstappen drove away in front, won by 10 seconds. The only salt in the soup was perhaps Carlos Sainz, who ventured out on the soft tires, which created a bit of a spectacle, but not really, and that led to discussions about whether the sprint format is really great. Christian Horner then threw reverse grid for the top 10 into the room again, so I hope it doesn't go in that direction, but you have to discuss the whole thing. I would be interested to know if you liked it. Please tell me in the comments. The president, Mohammed bin Sulayem, is known not to be a big fan of the sprint. He says that it is also a lot for his staff, for the FIA. What you have there in terms of additional work sounds stupid for you now, but you really must not underestimate. There is a lot behind it, perk Fermé monitoring and so on. Mohammed bin Sulayem is a good topic. He gave us a very, very detailed interview, which you can read in our current print edition. Really, really exciting statements. My image of the president has changed a bit in the interview. The link to the print magazine is in the video description. The one problem today was that the sprint wasn't particularly exciting. For me, a much bigger problem today was that we've probably already seen a lot of things that play into the race with the long run pace and so on. We have an exciting grid with Charles Leclerc on pole, Lando Norris in second, and Max Verstappen only in sixth, and he hasn't looked that strong so far this weekend until the sprint, and then you could hope a little bit, oh, this will be a really exciting race. Will the race be exciting, yes or no? Can Lando Norris perhaps do something, because when he passed Carlos Sainz you could see that something was really happening up front, and he then closed the gap to Charles Leclerc. Now the question arises, yes or no? At Red Bull they say, yes, Norris is a serious competitor, it won't be that easy. Max will have to fight his way through the race, which means much greater tire wear when you're driving in traffic, when you have to fight for positions. At McLaren they say, well, not really, so Verstappen's tire wear can't be that great in the fights that it makes a difference. He was 10 seconds ahead of Hamilton today, which says a lot after just 19 laps in the sprint race and how superior the Red Bull was, which was seen not only in the sprint but also in the shootout when he used the medium tires. Medium tires are mandatory in SQ1 and SQ2. No soft tires are allowed there, and the performance of the RB19 is much clearer than on the soft tires. The soft tires often mask the problems of the slower cars a bit in qualifying, and the competition has already seen that the Red Bull really is much stronger than all the others. Then you went into the sprint thinking, okay, the Red Bull is stronger, and then you saw how much stronger it is. So that's why I think it's a real shame that we saw this sprint race today, because it takes away a lot from the Grand Prix tomorrow. In my opinion, in McLaren's opinion as well, so they don't think they have much of a chance. Red Bull, maybe they're sandbagging, maybe they know more, but they're expecting to have at least a little bit more opposition. I'm happy to be proven wrong at this point. And then there's Lewis Hamilton, who at least provided a bit of action up front for 1 or 2 laps today and was able to stay within the DRS window. Will that work in the race too? McLaren or Mercedes, who's better? Lewis Hamilton starts the race from 3rd position, Max Verstappen only from 6th, so he has an advantage for the Grand Prix, especially compared to the sprint where Verstappen started from pole. But Hamilton needed the DRS to stay on Verstappen's tail. Mercedes has packed the biggest wing it has, which is why the W13's so damn fast in the first sector. Part of it is also the update, which seems to work well, but you also have the biggest wing in use, which brings a lot in the fast corners. In qualifying you have DRS open, which really helps with the big wing, but in race trim you have the problem of high drag, so you have to be in the DRS window, otherwise you lose a lot on the straights. The Mercedes are the slowest on the straights, both Russell and Hamilton. Therefore, well, tire wear seems to be good, but just nowhere near as outstanding as on the Red Bull, plus they are not particularly strong on the straight. I honestly can't imagine Lewis Hamilton playing a serious role there. A lot depends on the first lap, of course, but otherwise they're not that far apart. Hamilton in 3rd, Verstappen in 6th. Hamilton still has Leclerc and Norris in front of him for the time being. If he passes both of them and Verstappen perhaps falls a couple of positons back, he's approaching the matter relatively cautiously at the moment. If he falls far behind on the starting lap, maybe there could still be a chance. But tire wear is really high here on this track, and the RB19 can then play to its strengths. On the other hand, we might still have a little bit of Lewis Hamilton magic from the Kota Goat, so what he always pulls out here on this track, you saw it again today compared to Russell. That's impressive. Will it be enough? As I said, I think I've let it slip a few times now. I don't think so. Mercedes isn't really counting on it either. The goal for Mercedes is to take a double podium, not to win, so that's more a McLaren versus Mercedes thing than Mercedes versus Red Bull or McLaren versus Red Bull, but I'm sticking to my guns. I'm happy to be proven wrong. It's set up, maybe for a fight for the win, but maybe just for a fight for the podium. Nevertheless, I'm really excited and looking forward to this Grand Prix.